gotta go down! It's gotta be that way!
There are action movies, and then there is Point Break. Released in the summer of 1991, this film arrived in theaters like a rogue wave, unexpected, overwhelming, and impossible to forget. On the surface, it sounds like a pitch that should have been laughed out of every studio meeting in Hollywood. An undercover FBI agent infiltrates a gang of bank robbers who are also professional surfers who wear masks of former United States presidents. That's it. That's the movie. And yet, somehow, director Catherine Bigelow turned that wild premise into one of the most thrilling, emotionally charged, and culturally enduring action films ever made. More than 3 decades after its release, Point Break still holds a firm grip on the imaginations of moviegoers around the world. It launched careers, redefined what action cinema could look like, and gave us characters so magnetic that audiences weren't always sure who to root for. Keanu Reeves brought a quiet, wounded intensity to FBI agent Johnny Utah. Patrick Swayze gave us Body, a sun-drenched philosopher king of the waves who made breaking the law look like an act of spiritual liberation. Together, they created one of the most unlikely and unforgettable screen partnerships in Hollywood history. But as iconic as the film is, there are layers to its creation that most people have never heard. Behind the bronze surfers and the roaring planes and the rubber president masks, there are stories of stubbornness, sacrifice, secrecy, and pure filmmaking courage that deserve to be told. So today, we are pulling back the curtain. Here are 20 insane facts about Point Break that you almost certainly never knew. Strap in, because this ride is going to be every bit as wild as the film itself. Let's start with one of the most jaw-dropping commitments any actor has ever made for a movie role. Patrick Swayze didn't just pretend to be a skydiver for the cameras. He became one. By the time production on Point Break wrapped, Swayze had completed more than 50 actual skydives, jumping out of real planes at real altitude with nothing between him and the ground but a parachute and a prayer. What makes this even more remarkable is the context. Swayze was the star of a $24 million production, a film the studio had invested serious money in, and the idea of their lead actor free-falling from planes was, to put it mildly, not something the producers had approved. The studio explicitly told him not to do it. The risk of injury was too high, the liability too significant, and if Swayze were to break a bone, or worse, the entire production could collapse around him. Swayze, being Swayze, ignored them completely. He snuck off set during off-phase and jumped anyway, doing it quietly, behind the backs of producers who would have shut it down the moment they found out. And the secrecy had real consequences. At one point during production, he fractured multiple ribs from a hard landing. He taped himself up and continued working, never letting on to the studio how badly he was hurting. He later admitted in interviews that there were moments during those jumps where things went wrong in ways that could have ended his life. Eventually, the studio discovered what he had been doing. Rather than simply fire him or force him to stop, they made a deal. If Swayze agreed to stop his unauthorized jumps for the remainder of production, they would officially sanction one real skydive that would be filmed and used in the movie. Swayze agreed. That negotiated jump became one of the most famous moments in the film, the scene in which Body leaps from the plane and Utah follows him without a parachute. The raw, fearless energy of that sequence isn't just good acting. It's the real thing. The film that the world came to know as Point Break almost launched under an entirely different identity. In fact, the production cycled through 3 separate titles before landing on the one that became iconic. And each of those earlier names tells you something about how the studio was struggling to define exactly what kind of movie they were making. The first working title was simply Johnny Utah, named after Keanu Reeves' character. It was direct, character-driven, and in the tradition of films named after their protagonists. But the studio pushed back immediately. The name felt too plain, too narrow, and it gave no hint of the adrenaline-soaked world of surfing and skydiving that the story actually inhabited. A title, they argued, needed to do more work than just naming a person. The second attempt was Riders on the Storm, borrowing from the famous 1971 Doors song. This one had atmosphere and mood. It suggested chaos, unpredictability, and a kind of wild freedom that did align better with the film's spirit. But there were complications. The song itself had specific associations that didn't map cleanly onto a story about surfers and bank robbers, and the producers worried about muddying the waters with unintended musical references. So that title was dropped as well. It wasn't until the middle of production that someone suggested Point Break, a surfing term that refers to the specific formation where a wave breaks as it meets a point of land, creating the kind of long, perfect, powerful ride that surfers dream about. The term captured everything the movie was: the meeting of opposing forces, the moment of maximum intensity, the place where control gives way to pure sensation. It was a title that worked on a literal level for the surfing content and on a metaphorical level for the story's emotional core. From the moment it was chosen, no one looked back. He is one of those casting facts that, once you hear it, rewires the way you think about the entire film. Patrick Swayze did not walk into the Point Break audition process as a candidate for the role of Buddy. He went in wanting to play Johnny Utah, the buttoned-up FBI agent, the straight arrow, the man of the law. He had read the script, loved it, and saw himself as the protagonist in the traditional sense. He auditioned for Utah. He read for it seriously. But something happened in the room. The casting team, watching Swayze work, began to see him differently. His natural energy, that effortless charisma, the spiritual warmth just beneath the surface, the physical grace, didn't say federal agent. It said something freer, wilder, more magnetic. They asked him to read some of Buddy's lines, almost as an experiment, and the transformation was immediate and unmistakable. Swayze himself has spoken about how, once he started reading Buddy, he felt it. Buddy's philosophy, his belief in living at the extremes, in finding transcendence through danger, in rejecting the ordinary constraints of society, resonated with something genuine in Swayze's own character. He was a man who had always pushed physical limits, who understood the spiritual dimension of athletic pursuit in a way that was deeply personal. Buddy wasn't just a role. Buddy was, in some ways, a reflection. The Utah role, meanwhile, went through a fascinating journey of its own. Matthew Broderick was apparently offered it first and declined. Johnny Depp, Val Kilmer, Charlie Sheen, and Willem Dafoe all came in and read for the part before Kathryn Bigelow ultimately went to bat for Keanu Reeves. It is almost impossible to imagine any of those other actors in the role today. But the fact that Swayze was nearly Utah, and Reeves nearly wasn't in the film at all, is a reminder of how fragile even the most iconic pieces of cinema are before they solidify into the versions we know. Any director can stand behind a monitor on a safe, controlled set and call action. Kathryn Bigelow is not any director. When it came time to film the skydiving sequences that are central to Point Break's identity, Bigelow did not stay on the ground. She got on the plane with her crew, strapped on a parachute, and jumped. This decision was not just an act of bravado. It was a calculated, professional choice rooted in Bigelow's understanding of what authentic filmmaking requires. The skydiving scenes needed to feel like genuine freefall, not like something simulated or approximated. To direct the cameras properly, to make real-time decisions about angles and timing and the specific way bodies move through open sky, she needed to be in the air with her actors and her crew. And so she was. The early 1990s offered filmmakers none of the digital tools that modern productions rely on. There was no computer-generated imagery to clean up a shot, no way to manufacture convincing free fall in post-production. Every frame of those skydiving sequences had to be captured for real, in the air, under conditions that were physically demanding and genuinely dangerous. Bigelow understood this, and she met the challenge by going to where the footage needed to be made. Her commitment extended beyond the sky. For the surfing scenes, she sat on a surfboard just outside the camera frame, directing her actors from the water while waves broke around her. On a film set where the ocean itself was a constant variable, Bigelow chose emotion over distance. The result was a film that looks and feels unlike anything else from its era. Visceral, immediate, alive in a way that only comes from a director who refused to watch from safety. The Red Hot Chili Peppers were already a significant force in rock music by 1991, and their lead singer Anthony Kiedis had the kind of countercultural credibility that made him a natural fit for the ex-president's surf gang. He was cast in the film as Tone, one of Body's crew, and the production had real plans for his character's involvement in the action sequences. There was just one problem. Kiedis didn't show up for fight rehearsals. The stunt coordinators had scheduled specific training sessions to prepare the actors for the physical confrontations in the film, and Kiedis simply wasn't there. His reasons, by various accounts, were vague. He was busy, he had other commitments, he didn't prioritize it. Whatever the explanation, the practical result was that by the time cameras rolled on the key confrontation scene, Kiedis was untrained and unprepared for the choreography his role required. The stunt team was not going to improvise their way around this. Allowing an untrained actor to participate in a complex fight sequence was a safety risk they weren't willing to take. And frankly, it wasn't fair to the actors who had done the work to be ready. So the filmmakers made a decision that was equal parts practical and pointed. In the scene, Body knocks Tone out with a single punch almost immediately. Kiedis' character barely appears before he's unconscious on the ground. His total screen time was reduced to approximately 3 seconds. It was a consequence that spoke for itself, and Kiedis was reportedly displeased with how it played out. But the production's message was clear. Showing up matters. Preparation matters. The camera doesn't lie, and neither does the edit. Before Point Break was a Hollywood production, before it was a title or a concept or a pitch meeting, it was an idea in the head of a screenwriter named W. Peter Iliff, who was working nights at a Greek restaurant in Santa Monica to pay his bills. Iliff was not yet an established name in the film industry. He was a writer trying to break through, picking up shifts to survive, and using the quiet hours after closing time to work on scripts. The genesis of the story came from 2 unlikely sources. Iliff had taken a surf lesson in Malibu and become briefly fascinated by surf culture, the freedom of it, the philosophy, the way the ocean commanded total commitment. Around the same time, he read a newspaper article about a string of bank robberies in the Los Angeles area that had unusual characteristics. The robbers were coordinated, fast, and seemingly untraceable. The combination of those 2 things, surf culture and professional crime, sparked something in his imagination, and he started writing. He was paid $6,000 for that original draft, for a script that would go on to earn over $80 million worldwide. That figure is staggering in retrospect. But that's the reality of breaking into the industry. The people who take the earliest risks are rarely the ones who collect the largest rewards. The script did not arrive on screen exactly as Iliff wrote it. Catherine Bigelow, once she came aboard, felt that certain elements needed to be reworked, and she turned to someone she trusted for help. That someone was James Cameron, which brings us to the next extraordinary layer of this film's history. One of the most memorable moments in Point Break is its ending. Body, having escaped capture after years of evading Johnny Utah, has made his way to Bells Beach in Victoria, Australia, where a legendary storm is producing waves of almost mythical proportions. The so-called 50-year storm, a once-in-a-generation event that draws Body to the ocean one final time. The film even puts up a title card confirming the location. Bells Beach, Australia. None of it was filmed there. Not a single frame of the climactic sequence was shot anywhere near the Australian coastline. The entire ending was filmed on the north shore of Oahu, Hawaii, where the wave conditions were more predictable, the logistics more manageable, and the filming environment safer for the cast and crew. The production never went to Australia at all. The decision was straightforwardly practical. Bells Beach, while genuinely spectacular, was not producing the kind of massive, cinematic swells that the ending demanded. The North Shore of Hawaii, on the other hand, is one of the most reliably powerful surf locations on Earth, and the waves available there during the filming window were exactly what Bigelow's vision required. Safety was also a factor. Filming in unpredictable open ocean conditions is dangerous, and the Hawaiian location gave the crew more control over the environment. To sell the Australian setting, the production used real aerial and landscape footage of the Victorian coastline, cutting it together with the Hawaiian close-ups and wide shots through careful editing. The result was seamless enough that audiences accepted it completely for decades. Even people who have seen the film dozens of times often don't realize that the Australian ending never left the Pacific. The foot chase sequence in Point Break, the one where Johnny Utah pursues Body through backyards and over fences and through strangers' homes, is one of the most propulsive and kinetically exciting chase scenes in action movie history. It puts you inside the pursuit in a way that feels almost uncomfortably immediate. And the reason it feels that way is because the camera technology required to shoot it didn't exist before this film. The production had to invent it. The challenge was real. Standard camera equipment was too heavy and too rigid for the kind of running, jumping, fence-vaulting movement the sequence demanded. Steadicam rigs of the era were designed for smoother, more controlled motion. They could follow an actor down a hallway, but they couldn't survive the physical chaos of a full-speed foot chase through an obstacle-filled residential neighborhood. Camera operator James Murrow worked with the production to engineer a solution they called the Pogo Cam, a handheld 35mm camera that weighed around 18 pounds and incorporated a gyroscopic stabilizer borrowed from Steadicam technology. The result was a rig that could absorb the shock of running while still producing a stable, usable image. An additional innovation was a small wire loop mounted above the lens that allowed the operator to see a rough approximation of the frame without having to look through the eyepiece, which would have been impossible while sprinting at full speed. The Pogo Cam changed the visual language of the chase. It could go everywhere the actors went, match their speed and their urgency, and deliver footage that felt alive in a way that a mounted or tracked camera simply couldn't. Actors who worked on the sequence later commented that the camera's presence, its weight, its movement, its closeness, genuinely intensified the feeling of being chased. Here is something that will fundamentally change how you watch the foot chase sequence. The man in the Ronald Reagan mask, the one sprinting through backyards, vaulting fences, and leading Johnny Utah on one of cinema's great pursuits, is not Patrick Swayze. It's a stunt double. And the reason Swayze wasn't there at all is that he was on another continent entirely. While Point Break was still in production, Ghost was released and became a phenomenon. The film was a massive cultural event, and the studio needed Swayze for a publicity tour. He was sent to Europe to promote Ghost while Point Break was still being shot, and the scheduling meant that the foot chase sequence, one of the most important action set pieces in the film, had to be completed without him. A stunt performer donned the Reagan mask and did the entire chase. Every jump, every stumble, every burst of speed through a stranger's yard. That's not Swayze. The mask, of course, makes the deception invisible on screen. You never see Body's face during the chase, which means the double could be anyone who had the right athletic profile and could move convincingly in the mask. What makes this even more extraordinary is that Swayze himself didn't see the footage until the film's premiere. He watched the completed foot chase for the first time the night the movie screened for audiences. His reaction to seeing how the sequence had come together, how fluid and exciting it was, how convincingly the double had carried the role, is not something that was ever extensively recorded. But the fact remains, one of the most celebrated action scenes of the 1990s features its star's face for approximately 0 seconds. Keanu Reeves came to Point Break with no surfing experience whatsoever. None. He had never ridden